Alrighty, moving right along, I'm going to talk the next little while about health and safety in the commercial kitchens. And this is a little bit longer chapter or section, I should say. And the big four that contribute the vast majority of health and safety issues in a commercial kitchen are the first one here on the left-hand side, slips and trips, and then improper handling of knives, then muscle and skeletal problems and issues, and the last one over there on the far right-hand side is dermatitis. And so what this whole chapter is about is talking about these issues. What are some of the causes of, for example, slips and trips, and what are the causes of improper handling of knives? Not only what are the causes, but what can we do as experts, food service experts, to help our customers better understand these issues, and what are the things they can put in place to eliminate them as much as possible. Well, some of the major causes of slips and trips that you would find in any food service operation are food spillages. Makes sense. I mean, food falls on the floor. Then if it's not cleaned up properly or immediately and properly, it's an absolute magnet for slips and trips. Then you have water overflow and/or water leaks. It's another major cause of slips and trips. Then you have a floor that is in poor condition. How many of you have ever gone into a restaurant and looked at the floor and it was just cracks and crevices and paint chipped off and tiles that have been broken, et cetera, that type of thing? It's definitely an example of a floor that is in very, very poor condition. Trip hazards such as unexpected obstacles sitting or standing in the way. Again, how many times have you gone into a food service facility, into a kitchen, and all of a sudden you bang your toe or you bang your knee on something that shouldn't be there? And so again, that's something else. Some of the other major causes of slips and trips are, cleaning wet or dirty floors. That's why you see these little yellow triangles that are sitting out there, or should be sitting out there in a restaurant floor where it's just been cleaned or it's wet or whatever. Then you have carrying hot oil is another way of causes of slips and trips. And most trips are due to poor housekeeping. So, which basically means you really need to have very, very good housekeeping procedures in place as a means of avoiding slips and trips into any particular food service facility. So how to prevent them? For some of the things that I got several slides that I mentioned up here where I say stop the floor from getting wet. Well, that's an obvious statement, but how can you go about, or what can you put in place in a food service facility? Things that you need to do to help or prevent, I should say, the floor from getting wet. Well, maintain all the equipment to prevent any leaks of oil, water, and the like. Alrighty, so make sure the equipment is in proper working condition or order. For example, a gasket on a combi oven steamer or just on a plain steamer. Make sure that it is, first of all, if it's not properly installed or if it's ruined, then it's not going to get the correct cooking results that you're looking for. But secondly, it's going to start leaking water out into the floor. And that obviously is a major source of slips and trips. Put in place a system for promptly reporting and dealing with any equipment failures. This is an internal management / internal leadership position, or a task, I should say, or responsibility, by just putting simple little systems in place like that. There's several major chains, global chains that exist out there that have very, very, very precise procedures for all their employees to follow to prevent these types of things from happening. So, hey, your customers, that's a value-added service that you could certainly provide. Something else, other things, other ways to stop the floor from getting wet. Use splash guards on edged work surfaces as a way of containing the spillage. Just have a little lip on the front. You're all familiar with lips on work tables and things of that nature. And use lids and covers on your pots and pans as well, because if you don't, then the water is going to start to escape. The water starts to boil and turn into vapor. Water vapor gets on the floor, makes it very, very wet, slippery, and so on and so forth, that type of thing. Some other things that stop the floor from getting wet. Have a good extraction and ventilation to remove steam and grease before it can be deposited on the floor. The ventilation system is very, very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Use drainage channels and drip trays to carry water, steam drips, and waste away from the tilting kettles, brat pans, and other pieces of equipment. A few months ago, back in North America, I was in this hotel, into this kitchen. And there was just water all over the damn place. It was just on the floor. It was just absolutely unbelievable. And what had happened is that this particular hotel had a couple of tilting kettles and one tilting brat pan. And the designer and the installer did not take into consideration the pour arc or the pour angle when they tilted the kettles forward or when they tilted the braising pan forward. There were two different sizes of tilting kettles, and the brat pan had a different pour angle as well. So 3 different pour angles when the content came out of those particular pieces of equipment. That means, because there's 3 different pour angles, you need basically 3 different trough positionings, correct? Right. This place didn't. It had 1 trough positioning on the floor that was designed to catch all of the pour from the 2 tilting kettles and the 1 tilting brat pan, which is totally wrong. So the floor was constantly getting wet because of product being poured out. Any water or any condensation, that came out of the kettle would hit the floor in the wrong place and would not go into the actual drain channel itself, which is an absolutely huge mistake. So what they were doing in the process when I was there was literally ripping up the entire floor and putting in new plumbing, new channels, drain channels, to accommodate the 3 different pour angles that were coming from those 3 particular pieces of equipment that I just mentioned. So that is absolutely critical that you match the pour angle, sorry for all this nomenclature, match the pour angle with the actual drainage on the floor. And that in itself, it will be a significant improvement. It will go significantly into eliminating as much water as possible from the actual floor itself. Some other things that you can do to stop from getting the floor wet: site and messy operations away from walkways and kitchen thoroughfares. So what do I mean by this? Any operations that are messy or water related in a kitchen, make sure that they are as far away as possible from the main thoroughfares in the actual kitchen itself. So if this is a main thoroughfare right here, or between the sets of tables, then if that's the main thoroughfare, then have any messy operations as far away as you absolutely possibly can. And by doing so, you significantly reduce the chances of slips and trips in your facility. Provide suitable floor mats to minimize the amount of water tracked in from any external sources. That's another thing you can do to eliminate as much as possible the slips and trips in it. So how do you prevent some of these things from happening? The kitchen floor needs to have enough grip to it. And it's very interesting. There's companies, as you probably well know out there, that make specialty paints and specialty coatings specifically for the food service industry that significantly increase the gripping capabilities of people walking on the floor of a particular food service operation. So there's specialty products that exist out there that you can get for your food service facility that will eliminate as much as possible the slips and trips, just because you're now getting a much stronger or a tighter grip on the actual floor itself. So that's one of the things that you can do. Again, going to the second point, a floor that has as much slip resistance characteristics as possible, that's the type of flooring that you should be recommending to your customers. Make sure that all steps and slopes and any changes in any levels are safe, and that all floors should be as even as much as you possibly can. I've seen it, you've seen it as well. You go into a restaurant, into a kitchen, and there's different levels within the kitchen. You might have to walk up into a walk-in freezer or refrigerator, going from one room to the next if an addition has been made to the kitchen, or retrofitting the kitchen. You don't want that. You want the floor to be absolutely perfectly flat as much as you absolutely possibly can throughout the entire environment. And actually even going from the kitchen into the servery area, or going from the kitchen into the actual restaurant itself, the front of the house. Make sure that there's not even the slightest little step that you have to go up. Even a half a centimeter or a centimeter can cause some major slips or trips within a food service environment. So you really need to guard against that. Some of the things, how to prevent it: design the kitchen for high visibility. Make sure that all the places where people walk are adequately lit. Alrighty. Again, because people want to see what the heck's going on, and you don't want to, again, you're trying to decrease the chances of slipping and tripping. Make sure that all employees are using proper footwear, okay? How many of you have ever gone into a restaurant nowadays and you've seen employees just walking or wearing running shoes or walking shoes or things of that nature? Yeah, they might be comfortable, but from a safety perspective, they're probably one of the worst things that you could possibly get, because the treads on these things are rather slick, and most of them, they might look good and have appeal to the operator, or the employee, I should say, but certainly are not designed for proper safety within a food service environment. And removing any and all obstacles that might be in the way. I mean, a lot of these things are very, very obvious, but as I said earlier this morning, sometimes the obvious gets thrown out the window very, very quickly, and you've always got to revert back to what you think is, not think, but what is the best operating procedures to stop slips and trips within a food service facility. The next big one was improper use of knives. It's a very, very common issue within the food service industry on a global basis, and you need to find ways to minimize the risk of using knives as much as you absolutely possibly can. The simple things like training all employees on the safe use of knives I should say, and safe working practices when sharpening those particular knives. You would think it would be common sense, but it's not. Repeating myself from earlier, people throw common sense out the window when they get into a busy, fast-paced operating environment, and you can't do that. As soon as you start doing that, you're going to end up with all sorts of problems. Use a knife that is designed specifically for a very, very specific task. That's why they exist, alrighty? That's why different knives exist for different tasks. Yes, it's easier just to quickly clean off a fish boning knife and use it on something else, but you shouldn't. If you're going to be chopping, don't use a fish boning knife or vice versa. Use a knife that is specifically geared or designed for a specific task within the food service operation. So that's another way how you can start minimizing the dangers associated with. So do those types of things. Other things, always keep knives sharp. And you say, well, isn't a dull knife a little bit, because it's dull, it's not going to, it could be a little bit safer? No, just the total opposite. The sharper the knife, the easier it is to cut, and you don't have to use near as much effort. There's a lot less resistance in cutting something when you have a knife that is very, very, very sharp. So that's the idea of keeping knives as sharp as you absolutely possibly can when cutting. Another one of the do's is when cutting, make sure that you're doing so on a very, very stable surface. I know at home in our sink, we've got a cutting board that goes over part of the sink, and the damn thing just doesn't fit right. So when you start cutting, the board becomes uneven, and so many different times you think, because I'm even talking about this, that I wouldn't do it at home. Common sense, I throw it out the window at home sometimes, and I start cutting on this cutting board, and all of a sudden the cutting board moves. And I've come close several times of really damaging myself. And so it's, again, make sure that it's a very, very stable, flat surface cutting board when you're actually cutting the food product on, or whatever it is that you are cutting. Some other do's, the do's that you should be doing: handle knives carefully when washing them. Alrighty, it's very, very, again, that's one way that a lot of knife accidents occurs during the actual wash up or cleaning process itself. There's, how many of you have seen these Kevlar gloves out there? Anyone see these Kevlar gloves that exist? Okay, several of you. It's a great, great item. These are Kevlar gloves, cut resistant type gloves. I've seen a lot of food service operators, a growing number of them, using these gloves specifically for cleaning up, when they actually clean the knives themselves. They're not all that expensive. They'll last for a very, very, very long time, and they're impervious to actually cutting through them, period. And it's a very, very good item to do that. So that's something I would strongly recommend. And always carry a knife with the blade pointing downwards. It makes sense, but again, I've seen it where operators, food service people, won't do that. Again, it's just a very, very simple rule to follow. Some of the other do's: store knives securely after the use in a scabbard or similar type of container. Do not leave them sitting around on counters or on any piece of equipment where You significantly increase the chances of them falling and hurting you or hurting another employee. Use protective equipment such as clothing or cut-resistant gloves that I just mentioned a few moments ago when you are actually using a knife. Okay, so it's not, yes, it might be a bit of a hassle to go to the storage room, I should say, and pick up a pair of these cut-resistant gloves, but I can guarantee you it significantly decrease the chances of accidentally cutting yourself or a fellow employee within your food service operations. So those are the do's. Some of the don'ts that exist out there. Again, don't leave knives loose on a work surface where they can be accidentally pushed off. As soon as you finish using a knife, what do you do with it? You put it where? Want me to go back to another slide? Scabbard. In a scabbard, exactly, or in a place where it's designed specifically to store knives. Alrighty. Don't try to catch a falling knife. Don't be a hero. And if a knife starts to fall off a table or a workbench, whatever, don't try to grab that knife. It's really, really stupid to do so. And don't use a knife as a can opener. How many of you have ever tried to use a knife as a can opener? I have, and I can show you the evidence right here on my hand already. This is quite a few years ago, and there's about 7 stitches that went into my thumb and part of my palm, just because I tried to use a knife as a can opener. That's before I knew anything about CFSP and the proper use of knives, etc. So don't use a knife as a can opener. It'll absolutely significantly increase your chances of cutting yourself. Carry knives, well, don't carry knives, I should say, another do not. Don't carry knives when you're carrying other objects. Yeah, you might think you're saving time by carrying a knife as well as a can or a box of something, whatever. Don't do that. Yes, it's going to take you maybe a little bit longer time or more time to move meat over to this table, then go back and get a knife or whatever it is, but you are significantly increasing the safety component of your operations by not doing that already. Don't engage don't carry a knife in your pocket. That just makes sense. But I've seen it done. I'm sure some of you have seen it done. Or carry a knife in the pockets of a oh, come on, what do you call it? Apron. Apron. Thank you very much. I've seen that happen before as well, and really, really, really dumb thing to do that type of thing. And the last one that I've got mentioned up here. Don't engage in horseplay with a knife. I haven't seen this, but I've heard stories of sword fights in a restaurant, fun or play sword fights in a restaurant using knives. How stupid. You combine that with a wet floor and the slips and trips component that we just chit-chatted about a few moments ago, that with horseplay with knives, you're just asking yourself, you're just asking to have an accident occur. And when you do something like that with knives and you slip and trip, man, it can result in some very, very, very serious accidents, which can result in some very, very serious costs associated with it as well. Moving right along, the next one is muscular skeletal disorders. Those pains and those aches and pains that all of us get as we age, number one, but also by doing things improperly within a food service environment. So this is the third of the 4 different major illnesses associated with the food service industry. So assessing the various risks, such as with respect to musculoskeletal disorders, the various handling tasks that kitchen staff are doing. Alrighty. So what is it they're really doing? I talked to a company not too long ago, a chain in the industry, and it's one of their executives, and they said they were evaluating virtually every single task that's taking place within the food service environment. So how much people have to lift, how they're lifting it, where the boxes are, a product is located, and so on and so forth. So they're going back and looking at internal processes within food service operations to see what can we do to make it better, more efficient, significantly reduce risk of hurting backs, and so on and so forth in our food service operations. So people are paying attention to it. It's all about ergonomics, basically. How can we improve the ergonomics of a food service environment, which is getting more and more legal attention, I might add. What are the loads that they are lifting? In a lot of countries around the world, a growing number of countries around the world, there's an absolute maximum that any one individual, regardless of what industry they're in, whether it be the food service industry or you name it, any healthcare industry, there's a maximum amount that any individual by law is allowed to lift by him or herself without getting help already. And it can vary between, one of the lowest ones I've seen is 21 or 22 kilograms up to 26 kilograms that an individual maximum can lift without getting assistance. Again, the idea behind it is for ergonomic safety and to decrease the potential back back damage, muscular issues associated with lifting heavy loads. And the environment that they're working in, you have to take a look, again, is what are some of the risk hazards just within the general environment? Are there tables that are protruding out into an aisle farther than they should be, and things of that nature? So that's what I'm referring to there. Some other things, assessing the various risk factors. What are the various capabilities of each of the workers within the food service environment? Are they relatively small? Are they relatively old? Don't have the strength that maybe a younger person or a bigger person might have? So that's got to be looked at. The positions they need to get themselves in order to do the particular task or job. That's another thing that you've got to take a look at as a food service operator, or you as advising or working with the food service operators out there. And the amount of time that is spent on each specific task. This relates to this little thing called repetitive motion trauma. How many of you have heard of that term before? Repetitive motion trauma. It is becoming, again, it's all ergonomics. It's becoming a very, very big issue globally within the food service industry. And we need to start paying attention to it. So that has an impact upon what we sell, the design of the equipment if you're a manufacturer in the industry, and how repetitive an employee, or what's the repetitive rate of an employee in a food service environment using one particular piece of equipment or performing one task with a specific piece of equipment. So the amount of time spent on each task is very, very important. It's just basically you're assessing your entire operations within your facility as to what are the various tasks and responsibilities that each person is in charge to do. So find ways to improve some of the working conditions in the facility. These are some of the things that you can do. Replace or repair uneven floors. I talked about this a few moments ago when I was talking about slips and trips. And uneven floors is a major cause of slips and trips. It's also a major cause of musculoskeletal disorders within the food service industry as well. So you got to make sure that your floors are absolutely perfectly flat as much as you possibly can. Here you see on the upper right, or on the right-hand side, that is a slight step up that employees have to go up. It's an automatic magnet for slips and trips and musculoskeletal problems to occur by having to constantly step up or step down. Sometimes you even forget it's there and you trip yourself. Provide trolley ramps at changes within floor level. So if you can't have one homogeneous flat floor, then have ramps that actually where you can but push trolleys up, so you don't have to literally lift one side of a trolley up and over an edge like this and move it forward, and then lift the other end of the trolley up as well. Properly maintain all catering equipment as much as you possibly can. Some other things that you can do to find ways to improve the workplace conditions for your employees is shelves should never be overloaded. Alrighty, makes sense. Install automatic doors in the restaurant or your food service facility where the employees are constantly going through on a regular basis. They don't have to push. They don't have to push down on a handle or throw their shoulder into a wall, or not to a wall, pardon me, but into a door to actually get the door open. So put automatic door openers in. It's becoming more and more common all the time. This would employ four-wheel trolleys with adjustable height and casters. The place that I ate at last night in, I forget the name of it, what was it called? Doesn't matter. We ate in this restaurant last night, and it was interesting. It's one of the first places I've seen it, but the waiters and waitresses, they constantly move product from the kitchen out into the dining room on a little trolley, a 2-shelf high trolley that was very, very easy for them to move around. They didn't have to carry a tray with all the food on it. They just put it on the trolley itself, carted it all around, and that's how they move all the fresh food that's being served to the customers in this particular restaurant, and they also used it to take the soiled dinnerware and glassware away from the dining room into the warewashing area. So there was absolutely very, very minimal time where any one employee actually had to lift up anything. There was only 1 or 2 plates at a time that they did so, put it on one of these trolleys and moved it. So that's one of the things that operators can and should be doing. Place large mixer bowls on wheeled dollies, which is basically what just I talked about. And some of the other things, use mechanical aids to make life, I should say, much easier for the employees within your facility, which this whole subject matter is all about, basically. Use employee sack trucks, or employee, I should say, sack trucks as much as you possibly can. Again, they're designed to facilitate the ease of movement of product within a food service operation. Use false bottoms and deep sinks as a means of reducing awkward bending at the waist. Very interesting. The original sinks, anyone know how the original depth of sinks came about? Any ideas? No. The original sinks were designed so that if you held your arm straight down, just like I'm doing right now, and you had a fist, that the bottom of the sink would be where my hand, where my fist was. Okay, so all sink bottoms, for both domestic as well as commercial use, were designed based upon that. But that was 58 million years ago when they came up with that basic rule. And over time, people have gotten what? Taller, exactly. So the sinks, the basic sink depth has not changed, but as people have gotten taller, it forces us to bend over to reach the bottom of the sink. Okay? And that has caused a tremendous amount of musculoskeletal problems and issues, not only within the food service industry, but in the domestic marketplace as well. So a false bottom in the sink, it's going to be difficult to change some of these manufacturers to change the depth of the sink. But what you can do is put a false bottom in so that the operator, he or she, doesn't have to bend over as much to get it to the product that's actually, they're being washed within the actual sink itself. So something very, very simple like that can save an operator a tremendous amount of money and time by just, again, putting a false sink in the actual 3-compartment sink itself. And by doing so, you significantly reduce the amount of bending that an individual has to do when cleaning product within a 3-compartment sink or whatever. Again, it's all about ergonomics. This whole chapter, or this whole section of this chapter, basically is all about ergonomics. I need to redesign. Some other things you can do to avoid these risks. Start redesigning the various tasks that your employees are charged with. Find ways to reduce the amount of twisting, bending, stooping, stretching, pulling, and pushing as much as you absolutely possibly can. And there you may need a little bit of, come up with some imagination of some of the things that you can and should be doing to do so. Find ways to reduce the amount of time it takes to do a specific task. Again, it's all about going back and ergonomically engineering your food service facility to say, what can we do differently that will reduce the overall risks within our food service operation. Store those heavy items on shelves at waist height. Don't put it at the bottom. Okay? Why? Why do you not want to put them at the bottom? Pardon me? Exactly. You're going to hurt your back or significantly increase the chances of hurting your back. And people don't normally lift things properly off the floor. You should bend your knees and then lift up using your back. Most people just bend over and try to use brute strength to lift up something that's heavy. And that is the improper way of lifting something heavy off a floor or wherever that particular product might be. Employ teamwork for tasks such as moving heavy items. Again, I'll go back to what I said a few moments ago, that most countries around, advanced countries around the world, have established minimal standards for what an individual can lift by him or herself. And once it gets above that weight limit, then you need to start working in teams to lift those particular heavy items. And what else can we do? Make loads easier to handle. Purchase oils and easy to use. It has easy to use handles on them. Make sure that if you do so, make sure that handles have a good grip, that they're strong, that they're not going to break on you. So simple things like that. break down trays of number 10 cans before loading them onto the actual storage racks themselves. So don't try to lift up an entire case of number A10 cans. Break it down. Just lift it one at a time. Yeah, it may take a little bit more time to do, but you significantly increase the chances, or decrease the chances, pardon me, of getting back spasms, causing some sort of or muscular skeletal problem or issue. Those are some things that you can be doing. And also, take a look at, where am I? Oop. Go ahead. 1 or 2, I've missed. Providing the appropriate tools. Is the one, no, here we go. Provide the appropriate tools, the equipment and protective gear. Again, these are suggestions or ideas to help improve the ergonomic safety within a food server operation. It's things that you can do. You use rollers and or conveyors with respect to dish machines. Dish racks can get very, very heavy, can't they? When you put a lot of material, when I mean material or say material, I'm talking about plates and glassware. It can get very, very heavy very, very quickly. So don't put as much stuff into a dish rack. Yeah, you're going to decrease the efficiency of a machine, but you increase the safety component, ergonomic component with respect to the workers. Use trolleys to move large quantity of dishes. That's another thing from a mechanical perspective you can do. And as I mentioned at the restaurant that we ate at last night, again, that's the only way they move product from the kitchen into the actual dining room itself, and then from the dining room back out into the back into the warewashing area. Some other things that you can do with respect to providing the appropriate tools. Provide utensils and knives with ergonomic handles that are designed for comfort. For those of you that, well, all of you, I was going to say for those of you who were at the CFSP seminar, when we started talking about cutlery and items, and when I said one of the things that that had a little happy chef beside it was with respect to knives was the balance, and what was determined the best balance within a knife. This is a test right here. The tang, exactly. And you described it visually, but somebody else meant the tang. So you say, remember what the tang does? It helps with the overall balance of a knife. And the best knives that exist out there are the ones that are perfectly balanced, meaning they're the safest knives. The more balanced the knife is, the greater it is for the operator to use it, which in turn increases the overall safety of it. So bingo, spend a little bit more money, and operators should spend a little bit more money and buy those knives or pieces of cutlery that are perfectly balanced or almost close as perfectly balanced as you possibly can. By doing so, you're decreasing the chances of muscular and skeletal issues cropping up in your operation. Provide chopping machines for vegetables to reduce the manual chopping. That's very, very important. Some of you may have heard this before, but about a little over a year ago, I got a call from a lawyer who was had taken on a case for a client, or for one of his clients that worked in a restaurant and was doing manual chopping. They just literally just all did manual chopping all day long, and they wanted, the lawyer that called me wanted me to be an expert, I use the word rather loosely, to be an expert witness for this law case against this restaurant chain where this employee had developed repetitive trauma motion by just constantly doing manual chopping all day long for several years. And I asked a few questions, and then I said, well, what's the name of the company of the pieces of equipment that this operator is using? And he told me the name of the company, and I had to decline because that particular client, or that particular customer or manufacturer was a client of mine, and I sure as hell didn't want to sue one of my, or be part of a legal suit that was suing one of my clients. So I said no, and I didn't tell him the reason why, but anyway, I think this lawyer understood. But the point is this, that I'm making of it, it all falls back again to ergonomics and safety and ergonomics. In a growing number of countries around the world, and I don't know the exact status of it here in the UK, but in Canada, the United States, and Australia, a couple places like that, there is different statutes within the government and different departments within the government that are doing a very, very aggressive job at pursuing poor ergonomic conditions within the workplace across all industries, okay, across all industries, not just the food service industry. In fact, in the US and in Canada, these agencies have gotten very, very aggressive within the food service industry and saying, hey, look, you as an operator need to be much more cognizant of the ergonomic issues that exist within your facility, and if you don't, then we're going to sue you as a government agency, plus you're much more liable to be sued by the actual employees within a food service facility itself. So by using chopping machines that are automatic, you can significantly reduce the amount of manual labor that is associated with chopping and cutting vegetables and fruits and so on and so forth. Some other things you can do, excuse me, consider workbenches of different heights. There are several different companies out there globally that have got adjustable workbenches, which only makes sense, right? Alrighty? It just only makes sense. And so if you're a tall individual, you'd want a workbench who's working at a workbench that is probably a little bit higher than if you were an employee that had was much shorter in nature. So there's nothing wrong with getting these workbenches adjustable for the actual employees themselves. Yes, they're a little bit more money, but then it goes back to the 15 pains that I talked about first thing this morning. Worker productivity, worker safety. This falls into that particular categories that you're satisfying or you're helping alleviate some of those customer pains. Use ovens with side hinged doors versus bottom hinged doors, as they allow for easier access to the products inside the actual oven itself. Again, it makes sense already. But a lot of people throw common sense out the door when it comes to these types of issues. Provide long-handled brushes where reaching is required, like a peel, for example. Remember what a peel was from the CFSP course? If you don't, shame on you. Pardon me? Yeah, it's designed to move product in and out of an oven, alrighty? It's one of the exam questions, if you recall. Let's see, how many of you got that one right? I could go back and look. But anyway, so if you have a fairly depth, or the depth, I should say, of the oven is fairly deep, then you'd want to use, in this particular case, a peel that has a very, very long handle on it, or a relatively long handle, because you don't want your body to get close to the actual oven itself. So those are some of the, again, an example, some of the things that you can be doing with respect to that. So muscular skeletal disorders, there's a lot of things, as you can see, that cause them, but there's equal number of things that you can do to prevent them, using mechanical devices, just ergonomically redesigning your kitchen, or when you're designing your kitchen from the first place, make sure you take ergonomics into play. Because if you don't, it's going to have some very, very negative consequences at somewhere down the line for you as a food service operator. Alrighty? And again, it increases your professionalism and your knowledge when you take this type of knowledge to your end user operator customers that exist out there. Next one, the fourth one of the four biggies that are major problems within the industry is contact dermatitis. What is it? Well, it's a skin disease caused by working. And it develops when the skin barriers or layers are broken or damaged down. It leads to the redness and itching and swelling and blistering and all sorts of things like that, cracking of the skin. And it's the most susceptible parts of the body are hands, forearms, and your face. And dermatitis exists, or not exists, of course it exists, but the frequency of it is over twice as much for people working in the food service industry than it is for any other industry that exists out there already. So at least twice as susceptible to dermatitis taking place for a worker in our industry versus the general population. It's the primary cause of health issues for catering staff. I just got it up here. The number of cases is twice that for the general industry that exists out there. So basically it's very, very prevalent within our industry, and we need to find ways to avoid it. Well, how to avoid it? Avoid contact with when cleaning products such as food and water as much as you absolutely possibly can. So you want to, I guess the answer to this is putting on protective gloves when you're washing product, whether it be fruits, vegetables, dishes, things of that nature. Yes, it could be a pain in the butt to putting these gloves on constantly, but it certainly is a way to help avoid it as much as you absolutely possibly can. What are the other things you can do to avoid it? Moisturize your hands to replenish the natural oils that have been lost by washing dishes, washing fruits and vegetables and things of that nature. And checking your hands on a regular basis for early signs of dermatitis, and some of those early signs are itchiness within the hands or the arms, wherever it's starting to develop, the dryness of your hands or your forearms, the red skin is going to start appearing. So those are all things that you can do to help avoid the contact dermatitis as much as you possibly can. And again, people who have it and still come to work in the industry, it's an ungainly sight, is it not? You don't want to see fellow workers, with red hands and chafing hands and things of that nature. It's just not an appropriate thing to have on any worker at any one particular time. So again, those are just some of the things that you can do from an operator perspective to reduce contact dermatitis within the food service industry. So what are those four major causes of worker problems or illnesses in the industry? What are the four we went over? The last one is dermatitis. What is that?
Slips and falls.
Slips and falls. What else?
Inappropriate use of knives.
Pardon me?
Inappropriate use of knives.
Inappropriate use of knives, exactly.
Muscular injury?
Exactly. Muscular skeletal injuries, and of course the fourth one is dermatitis, and that I've just mentioned up here. So those are the four big ones to keep in mind, and as you can see from some of the information I had up here, there are a lot of things that you can do to avoid it. Conversely, there's a lot of things you can do to help the situation with respect to those four major issues within the industry.